I love the book of Philippians. It's always been one of my favorite New Testament letters from Paul. It's, like Trevor said last week, full of joy. It's a theme of joy, which is ironic when you think about it. Paul's in prison, has been in prison for 2 years almost, and yet this book is infused with joy. He's happy. I mean, he's maybe not happy, but he's got something that's equal to and maybe even more powerful than happiness. He's joyful. He's got an internal sense of well-being and of peace in the midst of really difficult circumstances for him. This is about AD 62, so 30 years since Christ went to the cross and did his work at Calvary and ascended into heaven. Paul's been ministering for couple decades now, at least. It's 20 years after he first visited Philippi. You remember we studied through Acts to chapter 16 2 weeks ago. We finished our halfway through journey in Acts with the planting of the church in Philippi. And this is about 2 decades later, and Paul's, had gone on another missionary trip, and he ended up in Rome as a prisoner, and he's now in prison. You see, he's really reflective in this book. On one hand, this theme of joy, but he's doing a lot of reflection. You see some nostalgia. He loves this church. He loves the people of this church, and he's thoughtful. He's reflective. He's nostalgic. He's hopeful. He talks about hoping to be released. Maybe I'll get to see you. He talks about his friends, Timothy and Epaphroditus, who are ministering to his needs. Probably the Roman culture of the day didn't provide many amenities like our common prison and jails do today, make it pretty comfortable for inmates. But in these days, it was very, very simple, very austere. Probably the food that he got was pretty much brought by friends. And so Epaphroditus and Timothy are caring to his needs. He's appreciative of the support that the church in Philippi have given him and probably are continuing to give him. That was part of the reason Epaphroditus left Philippi and made this 800-mile journey to Rome to take care of him, a long journey in any estimation. In those days, over roads and across a body of water onto the peninsula of Italy. He's reflective about what it means to be near death. I mean, he's in prison with sort of a death sentence. It hasn't been necessarily mandated, but there's a death sentence over his head. And rather than embittering him, which would be the common temptation, the injustice of it all, he's been done a real injustice here, and he's really not done anything illegal in the most specific terms. Rather than embittering him, the experience has drawn him closer to God. And so much closer to God that he's actually writing these letters to encourage people. I try to put myself in Paul's place and think, how would I behave? What would be the content of my letters? And to whom would they be sent? Paul's writing to churches to make his case for encouragement and for them to rise above their challenges to serve God. He's so upbeat. Chapter 1 you studied last week, and I want to reiterate a little bit just by way of building a little bit of a foundation for what we'll talk about this morning. So in chapter 1 he says, at length, he says, I'm praying for you. I long to see you. I'm praying that God's work will be completed in you. That your love, he says, may abound more and more in knowledge and in the insight. That you may be able to discern what is best, that you may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, that you may be filled with the fruit of righteousness. I mean, he's taking time here. It's not just sort of a placebo, a little platitude to sort of like, dear loved ones, I hope you are doing well, And then getting into really what he wants to talk about, which is complaining about his awful circumstances. And couldn't you send me better food, and I really could use a nice pillow because the one I have is crap, He's taking all this time to minister to these folks through the letter, which is the only means he has. There is no other media in those days. He spends a lot of time talking about missing them and thinking about them. He's joyful about their partnership, he says. And he says, it's right for me to feel this way about you. So he's talking about his feelings. I think that's amazing. He's also glad that the gospel is being advanced, even in his difficulties. He talks about this. Trevor alluded to this last week about, here I am in prison, and my imprisonment has actually served to advance the gospel. And he's happy about that. Some people are preaching the gospel for wrong reasons, but it's going out anyways, and he's glad. The whole palace guard has heard about Jesus. Local brothers and sisters are being emboldened by Paul's suffering. So he's referencing his own suffering as having a positive impact. And yet we also know that he is indeed suffering. He's not in any way necessarily minimizing it. He's just keeping it in its proper context in his own heart. He's creating a framework in his own heart about his suffering. He talks about opposition, that there are people who are opposing him, which I think is just the consummate irony. Why would you oppose somebody in prison? It's like all their power, all of their influence has been removed. He's in a dirty, dark cell and he's in chains, and still people are opposing him. He says, some people are, trying to stir up trouble for me. I'm like, why? He has retrospection. He's thinking about Christ being exalted, he said, in my body, whether it's by life or by death. Either way, I want Christ to be exalted in my body. If my body is being used to preach, my voice, my mouth, my hands to serve, my mouth to preach, my feet to walk, and I'm free to do all those things, I want Christ to be exalted in my body. If by death, I want my death to exalt Christ. He's being very retrospective. He has responsibility. He feels responsibility. He says that he is struggling because he knows that the Philippian believers in Philippi, 800 miles away, have their own struggles. They're dealing with some issues going on in the city of Philippi as Christians. And he struggles over that because he says, you're struggling with some of the same things I'm struggling with. He doesn't tell us what specifically they are. He has worry. He says, when Epaphroditus comes, he said Epaphroditus was sick, but God had mercy on him. He was on death's door, but God had mercy on him. And he said, not only did God have mercy on Epaphroditus, but he had mercy on me, because if he had died, then I would have sorrow upon sorrow. So Paul has sorrow. He's struggling. And to have a friend who's come to serve him and to come as an emissary from a church that he loves, to have him die would have been sorrow on sorrow. And yet all through this, Paul remains amazingly upbeat. He makes this extraordinary claim in verse 21. He says, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Wow. How many of us can actually say that? And I think here's a key that we want to talk about. Why could Paul say that? Why did Paul have the ability to say that and believe that and keep his equilibrium in what would be for most of us an almost impossible situation? Why could Paul do that? Here's the key. I want to talk about this today. God has given us a wonderful, priceless gift. And that gift, I'm going to what is that gift? There's a lot of words we can use for that gift. Eternal life, forgiveness of sins, there's all kinds of words. I want to use one word that seems to pop out over and over in chapter 2, and that's the word innocence. God has given us the gift of innocence. He uses the word blameless. He uses the word pure. He uses the word unblemished. It's a Greek rendition of the word without fault. This idea of innocence, the restoration of innocence. He says, in essence, he's saying God has given us this gift. Paul himself is so aware of this gift that he's been given of innocence. He has never forgotten it. In fact, he writes the last letter that he writes, 2 Timothy. He writes to Timothy, who is with him here, and later Timothy's not with him. He writes to Timothy, and 25 years after his ministry, he says, I did not deserve to be forgiven for what I did to the church by killing people and persecuting God's people. But God had mercy on me. And he's never forgotten this gift of innocence that he was given from his crimes. This restoration of his soul, that childlike sense of purity and innocence and naivete almost. And Paul is saying here, don't let anything take that away from you. That's what he's saying. He's saying it by his example. 2 years in prison, and he's still holding on to that. So chapter 2 begins, and he says these things. If we have received anything, any encouragement from being united with Christ, any comfort from his love, any community, any communion, sharing with the Spirit of God, any tenderness, any compassion, all these powerful words, he said, make my joy complete. All these things that have become treasures invested in our lives by God, this innocence, this fruit of this innocence, encouragement, comfort, communion, tenderness, compassion. He says, make my joy complete by being like-minded. In other words, let that which is inside of you come out and be reflected in your relationships with others. Being of the same love, of one spirit, of one mind. Don't do things out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather, with humility, value others above yourselves. Look to other people's interests more than your own. Verse 12, he says, he goes on and he talks about the purpose, the work of Christ in verses 5 to 8. He says, here's the example. Here is our example. If you're looking for an example to follow, here it is, in a person. Look at Jesus. He was in his very nature, godlike. He was God. Not godlike, he was God. Verse 5. Yet he did not consider this identity, this equality, something to be used for his own advantage. But he made himself nothing. He took the nature of a servant. He was made in human likeness. Another place Paul said he condescended to men of low estate. He humbled himself and became obedient to death. And Paul goes out of his way to point out that it was even the death on a cross, which is the most awful way to die, and it was only meant for criminals. So he not only died, he identified with the worst of the worst. Which, of course, wasn't the end of the story. It resulted in glorification. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and given him a name above every name. Now, we human beings like that part of the story, If I do this, I'm going to finally get where I need to go, But the thing about it is, with Jesus, he's not glorying now in his kingly reign and he's going back to arrogance. What he's doing is he's saying, now, because of this, there's this opportunity to disseminate this framework and this value system to the world. So we all get a chance to do this. He's given us an example to follow. Then Paul goes on from there and he says, so work out your salvation with fear and trembling. We are aware of an incredible conflict that lives right inside of us, wrestling for control. Work it out with fear and trembling. Meaning we're not quite sure. We don't trust ourselves. We're a little afraid of our inclinations. Do everything without grumbling, which is internal battles, You ever talk to yourself? Most of the time when we talk to ourselves, the language isn't very good. If you would turn a recorder on every time you're talking to yourself and listen to yourself, you'd probably very quickly erase it because it would be embarrassing. He says, do everything without grumbling. He also says, do everything without arguing, which has more to do with community. Arguing I guess we do argue with ourselves, but the idea is this is what we do with other people. But seek, in verse 15, he says, to be blameless, pure, innocent, even while you live in this corrupt and crooked world. So God's given us this precious gift. He's given us this clean slate, this freedom from guilt, this recovery of our innocence. And the fruit of it, all these things that he unpacked in the first couple verses of the chapter, encouragement, comfort, communion, tenderness, compassion. And he says here that this is our witness to the world. He says, among whom you shine as bright stars in the sky. When we live this way, when we internalize these things and allow the very nature of Christ and the work of Christ to work in us, he said, you shine like a star in the sky. Your life becomes something for people to look at. It becomes a guiding light, a beacon in darkness. This is so powerful. This is so at the center of Paul's identity. It's so precious to him that he was willing and able to suffer anything in order to retain it. This is what kept him going in this prison for 2 years. He valued it above everything else. He said in verse 16, he says, hold firmly to this word of life. And he says, hold firmly. Why? So that I haven't run and worked for nothing. I poured my life out for this, he says in verse 17. And this is the foundation of my joy. Not only to experience it himself, but also to see others experience it. So joy, like Trevor said, Philippians is about joy. It's one of the most joyful books in the New Testament and written by a man who has suffered extremely for what he believes. Paul's joy is not born of success in life or fame and fortune or drunken partying. However you measure how I get my joy. His joy is the purest form of joy, where all other sources of happiness, personal fulfillment, creature comforts have been stripped away from him. I doubt that Paul even had a soft pillow or a warm blanket in that prison. The food was probably bland and minimalist, brought by friends. Maybe occasionally he had something nice. Lived in a dirty, dark cell. And Paul at some point had to make a choice about whether he would become bitter or whether he would lean into God. And he, of course, leaned into God. And he made this profound discovery. So it's amazing to us that he writes this, that he keeps his innocence, he keeps his naivete, this naive hope, brilliantly alive. He had every excuse, every opportunity to be bitter. 2 Corinthians, he unpacks his experiences a little bit more, and he says, here's what he says. And you can see a little bit of defensiveness in Paul at this point. He says, "Are they servants of Christ? I am out of my mind to talk like this." It's like he feels a little guilty. I am more. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes, minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea, and I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from fellow Jews, endangered from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. Wow. Paul's basically saying when he avoided the bitterness and he avoided selfish, self-medicating behavior, he protected himself from damage. Think about it that way. When we seek our own deliverance from trouble and we run towards something, we damage ourselves. And by Paul's appeal to keep the faith and don't argue and quarrel and don't become embittered, he's making an appeal really back to creation. Remember in Genesis chapter 2, right after God created the heavens and the earth and mankind, and he puts man in a garden. It's called the Garden of Eden in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, Genesis 2. And the Lord God took this man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it, it says in verse 15 of chapter 2. And the Lord God commanded the man with these words, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die." The knowledge of the good and evil is not a blessing to us. God was trying to protect us from something, and we, of course, believed the beguiling serpent, went after the fruit, and it's been a curse ever since. This ability to lose our innocence, to have this knowledge, to become aware of evil, it gets inside of us. It got inside of us. The serpent promised something that he could not deliver on. He said, "You will become like God." Didn't happen. That road never takes you to the destination that it advertises. One person said, "Sin will take you farther than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay." Every one of us has moments in our lives when we are in some form of a prison, and we have to make a decision. Will we trust God and hold on to this treasure, or will we turn away and become bitter and then eat the bitter fruit of our choice? You all know I like Herman Wouk. He's one of my favorite authors. In one of his books called Inside Outside, about a young Jewish boy growing up in New York City, and now he's in college going to Columbia University in pre-law, and he's working for a joke and radio script writer, what they call a radio gag man. This is back in the 1930s during the Great Depression. A guy named Harry Goldhandler. And Harry Goldhandler is quite a character. And during one of their times of table talk over dinner, Goldhandler asks his writers this question: who is the funniest character in Shakespeare? So here's what the story goes. Across the table from me, Carl, another one of the writers' mouth silently formed Falstaff. I don't know if you're Shakespearean fans. I was going to say that anyway, so I did. Falstaff? What's so funny about Falstaff? Goldhandler demanded, with an amused sideways glance out of those puffy, deep-set eyes. What is Falstaff but a lazy, fat old purse snatcher and coward, a liar, a glutton, a drunk, a layabout, a whoremaster, a braggart, a bully, a cheat, a corrupter of the young? Is there a vice he doesn't have? Is there a virtue he does have? What is Falstaff but a useless, worthless, contemptible, repulsive nobody? What's funny about Falstaff? I had the sense to be quiet. All the others were looking expectantly not at me, but at Goldhandler. Clearly, this was how he enjoyed his meals, playing to his private audience. Well, it's one of the great topics of Shakespearean criticism. Of course, you're right, he said. To begin with, Falstaff is a man of powerful elemental appetites, of zest. He struck the table with a fist. Fat, old, worthless, on the brink of the grave. He loves life, and we love him because we recognize ourselves in him. We love life as he does. We only wish we had the honesty to live it as he does. If we dared only to be truly ourselves as he does, we'd all be gluttons and layabouts and drunks and cheats, running away from fights and lying about winning them. Falstaff is earthly human nature. He is us. And it hurts so much to see ourselves in that bulging funhouse mirror, distorted and yet our true secret selves, that we laugh so as not to cry. We laugh so as not to cry. I like this movie, The Bucket List. How many have seen The Bucket List? Great movie, starring Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman. These two men, both now in their later time of life, and they're both fighting terminal cancer, getting treatment. They meet in a hospital getting chemotherapy. Jack Nicholson is this wealthy hospital owner. You come to find out he actually owns the hospital where he's getting his chemo. He's a wealthy man, and Morgan Freeman is an everyday working man. And they're both getting treatment for terminal cancer. And at the behest of Nicholson's character, the two of them go on this grand global adventure to experience a bucket list of things we always wanted to do before we die. Nicholson is the devil-may-care, daring one, arrogant, self-possessed, narcissistic. Freeman is his polar opposite. He's gracious, curious, cautious, curious but cautious, reluctantly willing to tag along, but kind of hating to leave his wife and his children at a critical time in his life. And of course, Nicholson is just driving him to go and guaranteeing I'll pay everything. It's all on me, in my private jet. So how can Freeman say no? Well, they go and they have a grand time with lots of interpersonal conflict because of this polar opposite framework and value systems. And in an odd way, they become friends. When they get home, there's this heart-rending two scenes that happen simultaneously. Freeman goes to his home. He gathers around a bountiful table with his family and his wife and children in their simple middle-class house. And they enjoy the warmth of family, dinner, sharing, and belonging. Nicholson goes back to his house, by contrast, is alone in a mansion. He stands in his cold gray kitchen crying, slamming a TV dinner against the countertop because he can't get it to open. It's a powerful scene. It's a poignant illustration of life's true value systems. Morgan Freeman is just a middle-class guy, but with his faith, his innocence, his family, he has everything in the world. Morgan Freeman has all the money he ever needed, and he's alone with nothing. The world's joy, the world's definition of joy and success is superficial. It never brings us the deep inner peace that we long for. It never delivers what it promises. It gives us maybe an outward smiling face, but it's just a mask, hiding a deep internal conflict and unhappiness. But Paul discovered something better in a prison that couldn't take it away from him. He had peace, he had joy, he had friends who stood with him. He had a clean conscience and priceless innocence. And that is the message and the life that, if we're honest, we all long for. And that is what Paul is exhorting and appealing to the Philippian Christians to hang on to with all their might. Because God gave it to us as a gift. Don't let anything take it away from us. Let's pray.